Hi everyone, welcome to IDSKETCHING.com. This is Spencer with part 2 of our series on primitive combinations. So in the first video I showed you one way of combining a cylinder and sphere and rendering that, and I got a comment from a member, Eric, about my highlight, and he was correct. While my method was not necessarily incorrect, I will show you the correct way of doing it. So remember we shaded the sphere with a fairly elliptical highlight, as just like this. In this case, I'm doing the cylinder and sphere in a vertical arrangement. Again, you want to always start with your lightest gray. I apologize for the slightly out of focus here, but the principle is the same and it should read just fine. So we'll start by, again, using that chisel tip of the marker to shade along the contour of the sphere, like so. As we're building it, again, start with your lightest color, so light till you get it right, lightest color to your darkest color, or tone, excuse me. And as always, I'm drawing with my shoulder, keeping my wrist locked, unless I'm working on a detailed area of this drawing. Now once we have most of the sphere blocked in, I blocked in my cylinder as well, just like we did in the previous video. Again, trying to achieve the most contrast, so darkest darks against your lightest lights. And in the case of the top of the cylinder, I'm going, assuming my light's coming from the top right, I'm going darkest from my right to the lightest on my left. Now all that I've done here is I've used my 30% gray up to this point, and now I'm punching the shadow core of the cylinder, and I'll punch the shadow core of the sphere as well with my darker tones. So now you can see that it's starting to read as a round combined form. And so you can see by just adding that little extra contrast, we really, punch the form. And again, because we're working in a two-dimensional format, it's really important to have that extra contrast. So I'm just blocking in the shadow here, again, to help ground it on the page. I've got my 50% gray that I'm doing this with. But again, you could use a darker marker here, but this is just to help ground things on the page and help it feel like it's popping off just a little bit, or it's on a surface. So there you can see the combination of a sphere and a cylinder. And next we'll take a look at a more real-world example of a combination of these two forms into a product that utilizes this shading technique. So here we're going to take a look at a product. In this case, I sketched up a gas tank of sorts, so somewhat like a propane or oxygen or some other kind of tank. Regardless of what it is a sphere combined with a cylinder. So again, as usual, I start with my lightest color. So I'm using a color set of oranges in this set, or this case, and so I'm using my lightest orange to kind of outline my work area. And you don't have to do this, but it helps me kind of define where I'm going to shade and how I'm going to shade as I'm doing this. I do have with me my cardboard strip. Again, this was taken from the back of a pad of tracing paper, just a little, about an inch wide. I just cut this off, and the great thing about it is it absorbs the marker, so I don't get little drips or runs as the marker seeps under the ruler. It just absorbs it, so it's great for putting lines down. Now I've drawn a line in the middle of this tank. Reason being, there's going to be some transitions that are happening as the shading runs, as you can see here, up on this spherical surface. And so in the middle of this sphere, we'd have a straight line going through up and down. Or I guess it's half a sphere. So now I've taken my mid-tone orange and just gonna keep punching the contrast here. Again, there's going to be a nice punchy shadow core as well as nice punchy highlight if this is particularly shiny in any way. And if you're feeling confident enough, you can freehand it as well. instead of using the ruler, but I find that it helps me get some nice crisp lines as I'm going through the rendering. So now that I'm just about finished with my orange area and shading, I'm just going to add a little bit of tone to this hose in the back here. Again, using those same principles. So it's a cylinder that obviously has a circular cross section, so I'll have a shadow core, just like the main portion of this tank does, as well as a highlight. So I'm leaving, again, I'm assuming the light's coming from the top left. Usually I'll put an arrow on the page. In this case, it's at the top left there. And so on this hose, if it's a little rubbery, I'm going to shade in the whole thing probably, and the top left portion is going to be the lightest, and then I'll have a shadow core as we move from left to right. So in a minute here we'll zoom in and take a look at just a little bit of detail work, but I'm just being sensitive again to the fact that the light is coming from the top left corner. So things that are on the top toward the left of any surface that I'm drawing are going to remain a little bit lighter, and things that are away from that will be darker. Again, think lightest lights against darkest darks, and that'll help you with your contrast. So I'm just shading in this knob here with a little bit of 50% gray, putting in some detail. So let's zoom in, take a look. I've actually pulled out a 90% gray. So we talked about, or I've talked about with you about, 3 markers for your tones: a highlight, mid-tone, and dark. In this case, because this material is a little bit darker, I've pulled out another gray that's 20% darker than the darkest gray I was using before. And this will help me set this up as somewhat different material as well. So as you can see, I'm using the chisel point or chisel edge end of the marker to work on some of this detail work. If things look a little bit spotty, that's okay, because in the end usually I come in with a little bit of pencil and it really helps crispen and tighten things up. So if your marker looks a little bit splotchy, don't worry. If it looks really splotchy, then maybe you should worry, but if it looks anything like this, you should be just fine with a little bit of line work at the end to help crispen things up. And again, this is more of a presentation sketch than a marker rendering per se, so I'm doing things a little bit looser than I would with a marker rendering. If this were a marker rendering, I'd have my ellipse templates out and I'd be taping things off and masking the marker off so that things would be really crisp, but I'm not too concerned with that at this point. So here I'm again with my 90% gray, just shading in the top of this canister. And I'm going to shade a bunch of it in because I can always come in later as well with a white pencil and just add a little bit of highlight or gradation to this when I'm done. But in any case, if it is a little bit more matte, you'd see a little bit of gradation, but it's okay, it'll read just fine. So the top of this is going to be a little bit lighter because it's getting more light. And here we are. So if you notice, you can see on the left side I have my highlight running on the top of that cap. It follows the contour or shape of that surface all the way down to the bottom of the cylinder of the canister. So you can see how the form affects the highlight and shadow core of this tank canister. So let's rotate the page here. I'm going to take my pencil and just punch this shadow core a little bit. I had a question earlier in another video about what color, Prismacolor I was using. Usually 90% of the time I'm using a black Prismacolor. I tend not to use very thin so much unless I'm doing some light construction line work. But again, that's just a matter of personal preference. I find that the lead on these is a little bit softer, nicer to use, and it gives me a nice grain that I like when I do shade with it. So the disadvantages, they do break a lot, but if you search on our website for tips, you can find a really cool tip about microwaving your pencils to keep them from breaking. So again, just I mentioned earlier, just adding a little bit of line work can help crispen things up, and that's just what I'm doing here. A little bit of line work, a little bit of shading in the right spots, and it'll help things just really come to life for this sketch. So I've moved a little forward here, added some more line work, and now I'm punching the shadow core of this cylinder a little bit more as well. And you can see how just waiting for the marker to dry and then applying some more marker is giving me the ability to add some more contrast and again reinforce the form, showing this is actually a cylinder that wraps, again in this two-dimensional medium, meaning the paper. And here's what I was talking about as well. I can punch the shadow core in the top of this canister as well with a little bit with that pencil, and adding this line work really helps crispen things up. Well, there you have it. We're just about done. I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow to the bottom here to, again, ground it to the page. If I wanted to take it a step further, I could add a background to this, some proper notes and text. You can see on the right I have broken it down into its basic elements, so it's 3 cylinders in a sphere. But if this were really a presentation sketch, I would probably have some notes, some people in the sketch, whatever it takes to really communicate the idea. Well, thanks for joining us, and I hope this has been an informative video for you. Again, if you have any questions, you can submit them to questions@idsketching.com, and if it's a good question, chances are I'll turn it into a video just like this one, and feel free to send those in. So thank you for joining us. And here we're almost done with our shadow. Just going to darken it up a little bit more. Help it feel like it's on the page. And there we go. I always like to fiddle with sketches. Well, thanks again, and be sure to subscribe to the RSS feed for any updates, and become a fan on Facebook to interact with me online. Thanks.